Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Camilla Connor, and I serve as a research assistant for the Dana Foundation Career Network in Neuroscience and Society. I'm excited to host this conversation with Dr. Devon Collins, a PhD-trained neuroscientist, science educator, and a lead director of the Dana Foundation Frontiers program. Devon is a trailblazer in bringing together science, society, and leadership in a unique way. Today's discussion will focus on Devon's background and his work at the intersection of neuroscience and society. Devon, thank you for joining us. To start, could you introduce yourself and share a little bit about your background and current roles?
Hi Camilla, thanks for inviting me to speak with you today. I'm Devon Collins, the director of the Dana Frontiers program at the Dana Foundation. And I guess I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But to tell you about myself, I am trained as a neuroscientist. I became interested in the brain during undergrad. I started off in labs that studied congenital myasthenias and familial forms of neurodegeneration, namely ALS, among others. But I quickly, like later in my scientific career, I was sort of posed with that typical question that a lot of, especially researchers of color, are hit with: is, do I go to grad school? Do I go to medical school? I envisioned myself as a psychiatrist or a neurologist. So it came time to make that decision. I realized that I actually was more interested in figuring out why people got sick than trying to treat them, although that is a very noble career path, of course. So I stuck with laboratory research and ended up going for my PhD. So that took me here, where I'm based in New York. I did my PhD at the Rockefeller University, and I stuck with the brain, but then ended up kind of shifting career, well, not career areas, shifting topical focus within neuroscience, which I think really directly informed my career path, after that. And I studied opioid use disorder in my my PhD training and my postdoctoral training. So I was really interested in how intrinsic organismal factors like hormonal status, genetic background, and other traits and characteristics and things could really modulate behavioral and brain responses to opioids. And I think something really interesting, emerged out of that work. There's so many, I think, very obvious connections to, broader issues in society that are, when we're thinking about addictive diseases in particular. So it really opened my eyes to a lot of different places that my research could take me. But I'm happy to talk about that, in under the auspices of a different question. But to round it out, I was interested in science. I love the brain, and science has done really right by me. But I knew kind of going into my PhD training in particular that I didn't want to be a PI and go that canonical route and lead my own lab or research group. And so in grad school, I started to explore a lot of other things like science policy and diplomacy, public engagement and outreach. And actually education. So after I left Rockefeller, I was a teacher for several years in the New York City school system. I've worked at science education, engagement nonprofits, and then found my way into the world of philanthropy, where I am sitting right now.
So, given that background, what led you to combine neuroscience, education, and society in your career? Was there a defining moment that shaped this path?
Yeah. Okay. I think this is a really interesting question. So, you know, I don't think that there was one defining moment. I think that, all of these different pieces of my career have had a through line that I didn't actually see until I looked back, right? And so these are all talking to each other. Neuroscience, especially my background as an addiction researcher, my experience as an educator and someone who's really excited and dedicated to pulling more people, especially non-academic people, into into science. But I really think, one thing that I get from all of these different parts of my career is that I get to really combine people with experiences and knowledge and resources that they need to do the things that they want. So whether it is talking to other scientists about how best to do their own work and throwing ideas back and forth, or helping kids and learners to like really enter into their own as young scientists and researchers, or even if they don't want to become scientists or researchers, like just learning about science and how it impacts their daily lives, or how it is developed or how it can be used to different ends, I think is really like fulfilling to me. And now in philanthropy, I get to think about my own scientific experiences and knowledge of scientific systems, thinking about the ways that people in their daily lives experience science, especially as non-scientists, and really putting that together. And then I help, communities and scientists like work with one another in better and more creative ways. I think all of that is like a really interesting through line that has characterized all of my different career stages. And so, yeah, while I don't think I've ever intentionally combined them, maybe until now, that like satisfaction I get from getting people the partnerships and resources and knowledge that they need to do things that they care about has been really a motivator that has been under the surface, but maybe I wasn't aware of until I thought about it.
Great. So you kind of answered my next question, which was looking back at this nonlinear career path that you forged, how do all these roles complement each other?
Yeah. Yeah. So maybe I can go a little bit deeper to think about that. So I think as a neuroscientist and just training as a scientist in general, I think a lot about evidence, and especially like where we can be certain, where we're really uncertain about like what data can tell us. And I think especially as a scientist who has worked in such a like in an area where people are very heavily stigmatized, people with addictive diseases. I've also seen where, thinking about the people's experiences in a purely scientific or clinical way can really have its limitations because there's so many other lenses through which we view our lives beyond things like diagnoses, beyond biological mechanisms. And so really, this is where other elements of my training and my career really come in, because as a community engagement professional, I've really seen how, not only scientific questions can influence how people interact with scientific systems or how they experience scientific knowledge or able to use it. I really can see other aspects of their lived experience, where they live, in the country or in a city, or what their neighborhoods look like, what their socioeconomic status and how that impacts how they interact with science, what their familial structures or community structures are like. And so I'm really able to think about that lived experience and how it relates to scientific knowledge and the way that it's deployed in society. I also think a lot about how institutions can really come together to support, both scientific endeavors and the scientific enterprise, but also how people, from various different backgrounds are able to contribute and participate in that. And so all of these different pieces of my career have allowed me to, think about like different skills and learning and dialogue and institutional practices and zooming out to big societal levels, or zooming into community or individual levels, and really, putting things together in a more composite whole. Yeah.
Well, that's amazing. So my next question is, why do you think it's important to connect neuroscience and science in general with societies and communities?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question. And I can think of a couple of different things, but I think number one, thinking about my own home discipline of neuroscience, it shapes society in so many different ways. We all have experiences through things like medicine, through education. Technology is connected to the brain in increasing ways now, especially the law and neuroscience talk to one another. Public narrative or narratives about like our behavior and what we do and why and what that means. And many times a lot communities and public audiences don't really have a meaningful say in how that knowledge is produced or how it's used or deployed in society more broadly. And so, it's not just about like making sure people know about neuroscience, it's really empowering them to use neuroscience and then more broadly science in the world as a tool, right, to make their material conditions better or to allow them to do the things that they need to do that involve science. So whether that is improving their own health or mental, well-being or brain health, whatever it is, or thinking about the ways that they can protect, the ecosystems in which they live in, or protecting the integrity of their water supply, or thinking about what health policy or technology policy or data privacy might look like. There's so many different things that affect our well-being and the ways that we exist in society, and people should have a say in how that's shaping it. I think also there are a lot of questions that scientific research and especially neuroscience really raises. Like what should our autonomy look like? What are we capable of doing, and how do we think about that? What does our mental health look like, and what should it look like? What are our identities? What are the risks and responsibilities that we carry? If we're only thinking about science, in labs or in regulatory bodies or in, policy and legislative settings, and not, really situating that in a community context, we can really miss a lot of ethical, cultural, and other sort of impacts that can really profoundly affect people. And so bringing community into those conversations as well really helps us to, look for blind spots, build trust that we need to do anything in science, and make sure that research is like not only, really interesting and like and impacted by scientific questions and agendas and priorities, but also thinking about the social responsibility and legitimacy that science can carry. So I think those are two big things, right? Like making the science accountable to people and making sure that they have a say in what that science looks like and how it's used. And then thinking about, making sure that we can make the science better and make the applications of that science better in society more broadly.
Can you share an example of a project or initiative you're working on that illustrates this intersection?
Yeah, so I think one really exciting thing that I am doing in my role at the Dana Foundation, and that the foundation is just more broadly connected to, is the civic science community. And briefly, civic science is really a way of thinking about science and public policy and education and society and all of these different spheres that I'm talking about. To really strengthen the connections that they have with one another. So how are we connecting, scientific institutions, communities, and decision-making, spheres like, legislators, policymakers, so that they can better move forward on issues of like shared interest. And so, one of the things that I'm able to do through my work at the Dana Foundation is to be a part of this broader civic science community, and that includes thinking about how we can, provide better leadership and funding for the kinds of like science and society work that we're supporting. We're part of a collaborative of different philanthropic organizations that are working to strengthen all of those connections. And so this includes, doing things like supporting fellows and practitioners who are working at those boundaries between public institutions, funding community partnered projects, that are, doing things like informing local and state decision making around science, investing in the relationship and other infrastructure that scientists need to engage with civic systems. In neuroscience, for example, this might be thinking about, doing deeper engagement to make sustained relationships between researchers, community organizations, and policymakers around brain health, mental health, or like neurotechnology is a really big, piece of the puzzle here that we're trying to think about. And this is really great because it allows us to think about systems change, not only enabling people to do more science or, enabling more engagement or more policy making around science and technology. But it really thinks about like what are the systems that make all of those different activities possible? How can we strengthen them? How can we protect against harms as people are working together with communities, especially? How can we make the science better? How can we make it more connected and responsible to societal needs and priorities? So that's a really exciting piece of or bit of work that I'm getting to do to bridge science and society through my work at the Dana Foundation.
It's amazing and super exciting. So, for students or professionals interested in careers that bridge science and society, what advice would you give?
Yeah, this is an interesting question, and I think it can be really like an easy thing and a hard thing at the same time. First, I think a lot of us are, a lot of people are really working to build more substantive bridges between science and society. So there's a lot of work and a lot of, especially grantees at the Dana Foundation who are trying to make, these two big things really talk to one another much more easily and much more, I think I said substantively before. But I think one thing that you can do is, there are a lot of different ways, as I mentioned, that science and society already do talk to one another. So, whether that is education or policy or training for academics, especially scientists and other researchers, or even other folks in other disciplines that routinely think about scientific knowledge and questions. So, looking in your own community of, other learners, other professionals, really try to connect with people who you think are doing interesting work that allows science and society to talk to one another, more effectively and more often. So, if you are, say, a researcher in grad school, that may be talking to other grad students in other disciplines that are connected to spheres of influence that are really interesting. So, folks whose work touches on policy or on medicine and clinical systems, if you're not embedded in those, in those kinds of experiences or those networks, talk to other people who are and try to learn about that. Or if you are able to interface with people who have different kinds of training, so neuroscience and the law are often very connected because we have to make decisions about um, or understand people's, competencies or their abilities or, or their mental states as we're thinking about, how they might interface with different elements of either the criminal justice system or other systems of law. So talk to other people who are trained in ways that are different from yourself. So whether that's lawyers or policymakers or doctors, what have you, it's really good to get an interdisciplinary perspective and to think about how your own training and knowledge can really, can really connect with what other people know. I think another thing is to identify people who have jobs that look like what you might want to, what you might want to do in the future. And so if they're, again, professionals that you are connected to who have titles or really career paths that really resonate with you and you can see yourself doing something like that, I think that's a really good place to go as well. So really talking to people and doing informational interviews and asking people about themselves is really useful. And then I would say maybe a third thing to do is really a little bit more internal, but really, it's good to approach this from a perspective of being okay with not having a perfect path that you can exactly lay out because there are many different surprises as you're doing this interdisciplinary work to bridge science and society. And so there's no one or no right career path to take. It's really about what feels right to you and where you can bring your own knowledge and skills and connection to bear on the kinds of change or the kinds of work that you'd like to see happening. So those are three things I can think about. Yeah.
Great, that's amazing advice. Dr. Collins, thank you so much for sharing your insights and experiences with us. Your work really shows how neuroscience can influence and be influenced by societal values and priorities. For those watching, we hope this conversation inspires you to think about the broader implications of neuroscience in your own work. Thank you for joining us and stay tuned for more interviews like this.